Nicole's going to do a little intro for us.
Are we rolling?
Yeah. Yeah, you did. You are live.
Hello, thank you for joining us here at the Gilded Page. Today we've got Rachel Knox joining us. She's in conversation with Craig Pittman. Rachel Knox is a writer born and raised in Tampa Bay. She moved to New York in 2013 when she earned her BA in creative writing from the New School. After graduation, she moved back to her hometown to pursue her MFA in creative nonfiction at the University of South Florida, go Bulls, where she currently works as an instructor of first-year composition. In addition to writing, she's worked in the service industry for 14 years, and much of her work centers around food, labor, and class. Her writing also attempts to explore her identity as a Southerner and a Floridian woman, as well as the cultural history of rural and coastal Florida. She also works as a bookseller at Tombolo Books in St. Petersburg, another of my favorite little bookstores.
Love it.
And she's in conversation with Craig Pittman today. He's a native Floridian, which I am also. So
wait, there are three of us here?
Wow.
Yeah. A biologist will come in and tag us.
I know, right? Born and raised.
Yes.
Is an author, a journalist, and a podcaster. Born in Pensacola, he has covered a variety of newspaper beats and quite a few natural disasters, including hurricanes, wildfires, and the Florida legislature. I love that. For 21 years, he covered environmental issues for Florida's largest newspaper, the Tampa Bay Times, winning state and national awards. He now writes a weekly column for the Florida Phoenix and co-hosts the popular Welcome to Florida podcast. He's the author of 7 books, including Oh Florida, How America's Weirdest State Influences the Rest of the Country, a New York Times bestseller. In 2020, he was named a Florida Literary Legend by the Florida Heritage Book Festival, and in 2022, the National Sierra Club gave him their Rachel Carson Award. He lives in St. Petersburg with his wife and 2 children. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. And thanks to all of you who joined us tonight. This is so nice. Rachel, there are so many questions I have to ask you, but the one the minute I read it, I knew I had to ask this, which is, you mentioned just in passing that while you were in school in New York, you wrote an essay about manatees, and you found out to your dismay, I guess is the right word, that at least half of the class thought they were mythical creatures.
Yes, that's true.
Please expound on that.
Yeah, so we were working on I forget even what the assignment was. It was some kind of like a cultural history, use something from the past as like outside material and connect it to your experience. And I had always thought that this story I had heard about Columbus and his sailors discovering manatees was hilarious, about how they thought they were mermaids, right, when they first spotted them. So that was what I had kind of worked into the story, was, some of the diaries or journals. And then I wrote about my own experience with, kayaking and manatees, and a story of when I was a young adult, and I actually had a very important kiss in front of the tank of Snooty. I don't know if you know Snooty the manatee.
I wrote Snooty's obituary, so yes.
Oh, wow. What a claim to fame.
Yeah.
Snooty, this famous manatee who is no longer with us at the Sarasota...
Bradenton Science Museum.
Science Museum, yes.
I went South Florida Museum.
Yes, I went to a wedding there, and it was a whole thing. And so I included this story, and all of my classmates, the day we workshopped that story, all their hands just flew up, like they wanted to be the first ones to say something about the essay, which I was like, oh no, they hated it, they think this is trash or something. And they were like, I couldn't believe it, I had to look it up, I thought manatees were... And I laughed at the first person who said it. I was like, wait, what? Are you joking? And she's like, no, really, I thought they were like unicorns or the basilisk or something like that. And then my teacher, who knew that they were a real thing, obviously, she was like, okay, some of you are nodding, so by a show of hands, who also thought that manatees... And I mean, half of the class raised their hands.
Holy crap.
Yeah. I knew kind of right away, I was like, wow, there's something here that a lot of people don't actually know what's going on in Florida.
People, and you address this in the book, that people have these conceptions about Florida that are so far from reality, and it's hard to get them focused on the real stuff. The real stuff, some of the real stuff is hilarious, some of it is daunting and petrifying, but they have just this completely different idea.
Shocking.
Yeah. And you very effectively use pop culture to address some of that stuff. Tell me why you love Wild Things so much.
Well, I tell people all the time that Wild Things is not a good movie, but it is one of my favorite movies.
It's a guilty pleasure movie.
Yes. I saw it as a teenager, and, it was kind of in the cultural fabric of those years of my life, but I never really like sat down and watched it in any real meaningful way until I was much older. And then I kind of thought about it, and someone had made a joke about it, and I was like, I should go back and watch that again. And while I, had a night free and sat down and watched it, I really was like, oh, this is a rich
There's
text.
a lot to unpack, yes.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. And really, I just kind of fell back in love with it. And then I got obsessed with, like, the lore behind it. I started looking for, like, I went on the IMDb page, and I wanted to know in the trivia section, like, everything that was there. And got kind of obsessed with the making of the movie, which is almost as complicated and weird as the movie itself. But while watching it, I was kind of thinking about that time period of my life when it started to circulate, or when people were talking about it, and I noticed there were like a lot of parallels between the way I grew up and the kind of like caricature of teenage girlhood that exists in that movie.
Well, and I'm throwing a blank on the name of the heroine.
Susie.
Yeah, the her whole backstory and
Yeah.
everything is quite fascinating.
Yeah, she's from the trailer parks of the Everglades, but she's the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
Throughout the movie, which is great.
Yeah, as we find out.
Yeah.
Spoiler
Spoiler alert.
At the ending, yeah, that she's planned it all out.
Yeah.
How effective are there other effective pieces of Florida-related pop culture that you think would be applicable to teaching people this lesson?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of them. And the thing is, most of what people have a reference for when it comes to Florida pop culture are the furthest from what I think actually represents Florida, right? It's the Florida Man headlines, or they think of movies like, I don't know, Bad Boys or Spring Breakers or something that represent this really outlandish, like stylized version of things. But I do think there's some really great kind of undersung movies, TV shows, music that do it a little better. Like I write about in the book, The Beach Bum, I think is a great Florida movie, even if kind of by accident, maybe.
That's the Matthew McConaughey one.
Yeah, that I think really is kind of a love letter to Florida in a way, and shows some of the stuff that I think is still very realistic, but maybe in a more complicated or nuanced way. There's also a great movie I love called Bully, which is based on a true story about a group of teenagers who end up killing one of their friends who is kind of a horrible presence in their lives. And it happens for a lot of different reasons, but I think it also captures something about South Florida in the early 90s. And then there's another movie called River of Grass, not the same as Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and the documentary.
Should
but
be relieved of that.
Yeah, this one is much slower. It's from that, I forget what they call that era of cinema that's like really slow kind of art house movies that are like a little more avant-garde. But it's about this couple, this working class couple who are just kind of trying to make ends meet, sort of like a true romance style movie. And yeah, I think all those things exist. They just don't get as much buzz because they're not as like salacious.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, more like Yuli's Gold than
exactly.
Bad Boys.
Yeah.
What is your favorite Florida movie?
I mean, Wild Things is up there. I do have to say that's one of my tops. But I think The Florida Project is just one of the best, if not one of the best movies made in the last like 10, 15 years. Definitely one of the best Florida movies I've seen in a really long time. And then Moonlight. I mean, Moonlight is just like a beautiful South Florida movie. Again, not my Florida, very different experience than my own. But like visually, I think that movie captures like some of Florida's real, these scenes at nighttime, fluorescent lights, and these like steamy, like literally and figuratively steamy scenes between the main characters. And yeah, I absolutely love those.
I think my favorite part of the book is motel art, talking about the painting, I guess you'd call it, a reproduction of a painting by Thomas Kincaid versus The Highwayman. What led you into learning about The Highwayman, and what's your favorite Highwayman piece of art?
Yeah, I think I had always loved Highwayman paintings, but didn't know that they were Highwayman paintings. So I think I'm not sure exactly like where I had seen them, but they kind of existed in my consciousness as like, these are Florida paintings, maybe at, Florida history museums or something like that. But actually, I was visiting my best friend, who I talk about a lot in the book, Devo, who's a flight attendant. She lives in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I was visiting her, and we got to chatting with some people at a bar sitting at the bar next to us. And the one guy was an antique dealer. And we started chatting, and he found out we were from Florida, and he said, well, you won't believe what I have. And he said, I have all these Highwaymen paintings. And I was like, what? I don't really know. He's like, you're from Florida and you don't know who the Highwaymen are? I said, no. And then he showed me these paintings, and I was like, oh, I know what that is. I've seen them at, these museums or motels
Yeah.
or decorating, bigger buildings in Florida, or in like the pages of, like, they just felt really familiar to me. So I knew who they were, but I didn't have a name for what they were. And then he was kind of telling me the broad sketches of their history. And so, of course, being the very like curious and maybe a little hyper fixative person that I am, right away I was like, I gotta Google this and find out everything I can about the Highwaymen. And the more I found out about them, I was just blown away that they weren't part of Florida history in the way that it had been taught to me. Like, why weren't we learning about these artists in school? They're like found really important to not only the artistic history of Florida, but like the history of Fort Pierce as a city and as a region of, Black history. And so I just kind of got really obsessed with finding out a lot about them, looking for their paintings online, seeing if any of them were available for sale, which they are not really anymore. But especially Marianne Carroll, who was the only woman in this group of painters, this collective, who made art as fast as they could sell it, really.
Yeah.
You know a lot about the
And
Highwaymen.
drove around with them in the trunk of their cars.
Yeah, and sold them out of the trunk of their cars, sometimes with the paint still wet. And just, it felt like such a Floridian thing to me that they were, making a buck however they could, passing along that knowledge to one another, and kind of resisting, a lot of the stereotypes and the discrimination of that time period. And it just felt to me like I wish they had the legacy and the career that some other painters like Kincaid have had.
Maybe next time you can also write about the most famous artist from Florida, Bob Ross.
Oh yeah, yeah, Florida boy.
Yeah, which most people don't know. Anyway, the other piece of pop culture I really wanted to ask you about was Aguamala, the X-Files episode.
Mm-hmm.
What drew you to that one?
Yeah, that is one of those weird things that happens. I don't know if this is the case for you, but sometimes I'm writing about something and I have this idea for how it's going to play out, and then my life kind of happens while I'm writing it, and it takes a totally different direction. I had actually started that essay in that same nonfiction class where people thought the manatees weren't real, as part of another assignment, and I was writing just specifically about the opioid crisis, and kind of from a detached, reporter point of view. And I wanted to write about the X-Files, and I wanted to write about this thing, but I didn't quite know how they connected. So it was like a very loose draft where originally I had just wanted to write about this phenomenon of the Monster of the Week episodes of the X-Files. I didn't have one episode in mind. I just kind of wanted to talk about how you have this main storyline, and then these kind of weird episodes popped up where they left the timeline of the regular X-Files and found some cuckoo creature or whatever, But it wasn't quite working, and I didn't, I'm not a reporter. I didn't really have that kind of expertise, so I just kind of shelved it for a while and said, oh, maybe someday I'll do something with that. And then when I moved back to Florida after my going to school at the new school, and kind of right after the pandemic and everything, being back in Florida was very surreal at that time. And especially in my hometown, where a lot of people that I had grown up with were still there, but like a different kind of like alternate doppelganger version of them. I was running into people, and all these weird things kept happening. And I found out that someone who had been very close to me in my teen and young adult years had kind of gone down the same path as all these case studies I was looking at in regards to the opioid crisis and drug addiction and homelessness. And I sort of had to piece together what had happened because no one really wanted to talk about it. So I sort of started to see this parallel where I'm kind of investigating this thing. And then I was like, okay.
Did you hear the theme song while you were doing
Yes, absolutely. It was freaky. I mean, the way people avoided the subject and got really guarded, I really did feel like I was flashing a badge, being like, tell me what happened, and no one would. And so I kind of started to get this idea in my mind, oh, maybe this does relate to this. And then I watched that episode again and started taking some notes. And again, right away, the parallels just kind of were there. And the character of Scully, especially, who I've always loved, really, I felt like, okay, maybe there's something to work with here.
plus water.
Yeah. It felt like all of a sudden it just snapped into place, you know.
Now, I went to your coworkers at Tombolo and said, "What should I ask her about?" The main thing they suggested I ask you about was your shelf of recommendations.
Oh, yeah.
That apparently you are the master of shelf design.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, if I were being humble, I would say that my shelf on our staff recommendation shelf is at perfect eye level, which I did engineer. I fought long and hard as people left, and we got new booksellers. I would always kind of move my shelf strategically because I knew that would.
Succession.
Yes, exactly. And I was like, that's prime real estate. That's where people are looking. Like, I want that shelf. But I love to read, and I read pretty widely. I think. As you guys know, working at a bookstore, you have people who kind of occupy a certain niche, maybe, like, oh, that's our fantasy reader, that's our romance reader. But I really just am like, what are people into? I want to know about it so I can talk to them about it. And I think that having that approach and just being more open to different kinds of books gives me more leeway. So maybe it's just a numbers game, right? Like, if I cover all the territory, more people are inclined. But I've always wanted people to recommend books to me, and like been really interested in like that kind of alchemy of like, you get to know someone, you see that they like a certain book that you like, and you can have a conversation about it, and then probably most of us have a friend or family member or someone that if they recommend a book, you're like, oh yeah, I'm definitely gonna read that. They know me, I like their taste, whatever. So if I'm being humble, it's kind of a happy accident. If I'm not, I have really good taste.
Now, the other thing they said I should ask you about was the bumper stickers that came with my copy of the book, at least.
Yeah, that was a pre-order special.
What's the backstory on that, and why is there a flying saucer on it?
So the backstory on that is I have a good friend who's an artist that I grew up with. He's known me since the events of the book, and he has since become kind of the flyer, sticker, poster maker du jour of a lot of creatives in St. Pete. He does stuff for a lot of the restaurants around town, musicians and comedians and stuff. So since I knew him, I was able to call in a bit of a favor and say, hey, I want to make like a really cool bumper sticker that looks like it could be not necessarily for a book, but that people would look at it and be like, what is that for? So we were kind of playing around with it, and I said, I think it would be fun to put the name of the book on it, but maybe like a bad tourist sign off, like when you send a postcard from somewhere and they're like, missing you in Wichita Falls or something, but I was like, but anywhere else could be kind of the end of it. And he was like, oh yeah, like I'd rather be anywhere else. And I was like, yes, exactly, that sounds great. And then I sent it to my mom, and she was like, I thought it meant that you wouldn't want to be anywhere else. I'm like, yeah, but to me that's like there's a double entendre here we can exploit. So I don't know if it was successful or not. Maybe it's misleading. But some of the kind of interesting conversations I had with the publisher of this book while we were figuring out how to kind of market it, what to title it, because this was not the original title.
Oh, really? What was the original title?
It was called Spring Break Forever.
Oh, okay.
And after one of the essays in the book. And they were like, we don't think that's a good title. And I was like, yeah, I'm not really married to it either. It's just the name of the first essay. Like, maybe we could figure something else out. We talked about Wild Things, but we thought that would be kind of an SEO nightmare. Like, if people were searching for the book, the movie would come up. So eventually, when we settled on this title and we're trying to figure out how to market it, they were like, no, it works because it's a pun, but also we don't want to play up the negative aspects. Like, we don't want people to think this is a book about hating Florida. And I was like, well, I don't think they will. If they read the book, they'll know that that's kind of my main argument, is it feels like both all the time. But we didn't want it to deter anyone from reading. So that was kind of my caveat, was at least I'll put it on the bumper sticker, and maybe that will get people thinking or something like that.
Titles are tough. The only book of mine with that publisher that got through with its original title is the one that is selling the worst.
Yeah, and this one, people tell me all the time that they love the title and the cover, so they know what they're doing.
Well, and I like the ice cream kind.
Yeah, it works.
So are you working? This has been hugely successful, obviously. I mean, you got on NPR's All Things Considered, which is incredible. What else are you working on? Are you working on a second book yet?
I am. It's very early days. I'm still kind of trying to figure out what it is or what the shape it's going to take. Well, 2 projects, but really this is the one that is taking precedence because it feels like there's something there. But it's another book of nonfiction that I think will be a lot less personal and a lot more researched or reported. But because I'm me, of course there will still be personal. I just can't help it. But about dive bars and bartending. I spent 14-ish years in the service industry before I started really writing in earnest, and loved bartending and hated it at the same time, much like the subject of my first book. So I'm trying to kind of figure out a book about bars as third spaces and kind of how they like orient around a community, writers and drinking and bartending and stuff like that. So.
Or you could do the great dive bars of Florida.
You know, I thought about that as like a travelogue, but the thing is, especially in St. Pete, I'm sure you're aware of this, as we get more and more transplants every day, I don't want to blow up my own favorite spots.
Well,
for the general public, I'd like to still be able to get a bar stool at those places.
plus things tend to come and go, too.
Exactly,
So the minute
yeah.
you get the book published, half of it will be all out of business. So.
Yeah, and that's actually the part that I'm using as kind of a sample chapter right now is about my most beloved bar in St. Pete closed recently.
Oh, really?
And they had this huge party at the closing that just felt to me like such a perfect example of like what's happening and why places like that are important, you know? So yeah, we'll see. I'm still not really sure where it's going to go. I got to sell it first and see what people
It's
think.
kind of
but
important.
yeah, right.
Yeah. What are some, as a bookseller and an author, what are some books about Florida that you like and recommend to people?
Well, I happen to be talking to the author of many of them. Obviously, I think your books are
Remind me
like...
to pay you after.
Yeah, exactly. I think your books really show people, especially people who might not be from here originally, it really hooks their interest, especially like Cattail, I think is one of my favorites of yours, like such an important story that people kind of know about, but they don't really know the full complicated picture. And then, you know, as far as like fiction goes, I think in the past 5 or so years, we've had almost like just spoiled with Florida fiction. I think Tyler Gillespie, his poetry, Florida Man poems is one of my favorites. Lauren Groff, we're so lucky to have her here in Florida. Her short story collection, Florida, I think is the one that comes to mind most immediately. There's been some really good genre fiction about Florida that's come out recently too, like Myra by Nikki Gonzalez is a horror novel that I read and just loved. It takes place in the Everglades. It's about these 2 girls who grew up together in Hialeah and they kind of lose touch, and then one friend is like, hey, I booked us this kind of house in the middle of the Everglades to reconnect for a weekend, and when the one gets there, it's like a haunted house story, and it's so like all the spooky things about Florida, you know, leveraged in that way, which I was like, oh, someone has to make this into like an A24 movie or something. It's so good. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of like mysteries and horror, and I mean romance. There's so much good Florida romance right now. Alicia Thompson, her books, Ivy Fairbanks
the
is
serial killers.
yeah, and Cold World, which is set at like a Orlando kind of winter themed theme park. Yeah, I think there's so many great Florida writers. We're really lucky.
Okay. Let me open it up to the vast crowd here. Who would like to be the first one to ask a question, and would you like to be that person?
I'm her mother.
I know.
I know all the time.
Well, what's something you could ask her that would be embarrassing and would be personal?
There you go.
That's the question.
There's so much material there.
By the way, I like
on the
this
heels
shirt.
of Mother's Day too. Right?
Yeah. No, we're just super proud of her.
Okay. All right.
She's wanted to be a writer since she could read, she started reading at 3.
Wow.
And so, yeah.
So what took you so long?
Right? Exactly. I've been asking myself the same question.
Well, so I'll ask the cover. I love the cover. So there's so many things you could have on the cover of a Florida,
Yeah.
book. So how did you come to the ice cream?
Yeah, so originally the plan was for the cover to be this painting that a really good friend of mine had done when we were in our early 20s, and her first art show ever was this great painting of a girl with like a bikini sunburn tan line. But it was kind of, not the most PG, there was a little butt crack in the painting or whatever, but I thought it was just like perfect. And they actually really liked it at the publisher. They said, oh, we can like crop this in a way. We think it would be great. But the painting was lost to time, to
Oh, really?
an ex-boyfriend who had it at their house or something like that. So all we had was a photograph of it. And it was, that was
Oh, that's
10, 12 years ago. The resolution was
yeah.
pretty bad. So we just couldn't quite work it out for that to be the cover. In retrospect, I'm kind of glad. I think it would have maybe it would have leaned like more memoir than Florida. So I think it ultimately was a blessing in disguise. I still love that painting and think it could have worked for some of the promo material or maybe
Maybe the
something
next
else. Yeah, maybe. But we kind of went back and forth, and the cover designer had sent, a few different concepts that they had. But again, kind of like the title, it was really hard to find a balance between like, this is a book about Florida, but it's not like a travelogue. It's not like a, screed about how much I hate Florida. It's not like a love letter about how wonderful, just like getting the vibe just right was really difficult. So I sent some kind of like mood boards and stuff that I like with some pictures from the movies that were in the book and some pictures of jellyfish and stuff like that from Aguamala. And, we kind of went back and forth. And then eventually I think my poor editor and book designer got tired of me being like, no, I don't like it. Where my editor was like, okay, before we start from scratch, we made a bunch of versions of the cover. Do you want to just like see them? The ones that we said no to. And I was like, yes, absolutely. I want to see every single one. And that was in the file that she sent me, and it just kind of jumped out at me right away. And I was like, oh, that's the vibe. That's exactly it. Yeah. I think a lot of Floridians can relate to everything that communicates.
It is very on brand. Like,
Yeah.
It's if you've been in Florida there's on a beach in Florida at any point, there's a kid dropping an ice cream cone.
Yeah, exactly. And as a Floridian, you kind of feel that existentially sometimes, right? When like something happens, you're like, man, we were having such a good time. Why did this have to happen?
Oh, it's 3:00. Here come the rain.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's been this is my first book. It's my first rodeo, as they say. So throughout the process, I think as an artist, and I'm sure throughout your many books, you've kind of gone through this a few times. You have this idea in your head of like the title and the cover and what it's gonna look like, and over the many, many conversations you have, and even the content of the book, through edits and copy edits and adjustments, it becomes something different, and it feels like very painful or very like big to make all those changes. You're like, they don't get me, I'm an artist, And then eventually when the end product exists and you have some distance from it, you're like, oh, this is the way it was meant to be. They were right. They have more experience doing this. They know how to market books. I just write them. They can figure out all that, and I'm really, really happy with how it turned out.
It works.
Yeah.
Let me just tell you a very quick story. My latest book, Welcome to Florida, I had a friend who was the cartoonist at the Pensacola News Journal, drew the cover, and one of the features of it, since there was a piece in there about Florida's nudist resorts, it's a picture from behind, a cartoon of nudists walking up an interstate ramp, and the editor at University Press said,
No way.
no, can't do that. So it became cows going up there.
I mean, again, probably for the best.
Yeah. Well, but it's not on any book ban list, which means I'm not going to get any sales out of
there
that.
you go.
So.
It's kind of like the best thing you can do is get banned.
Yeah, I think so.
Have you had that experience in writing your earlier books where you kind of had a title or a vision for it that went through the ringer?
Oh yeah, definitely. Probably the worst one was the first one, which was the book about wetlands in Florida, and we went through, I swear, like 3 months of hell trying to come up with a title that eventually became Paving Paradise, which in retrospect seems obvious, but didn't at the time. So.
Yeah, and so for some reason it doesn't occur to you when you're like writing the thing, like, oh, that's a perfect title, but someone says it to you and you're like, oh.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, do you have any questions, Ben?
I probably just.
I'd like to know what your favorite moment of the tour has been.
Oh, that's a great question.
Favorite moment of the tour. I've had some really interesting experiences, and probably the most like illuminating thing is just being in different cities in Florida and being reminded that there are 100 different Floridas. Like every city is so different in its own, good and bad, in its own ways. Like being in Miami, I had a great time in Miami, but on the way home, I kind of had a little bit of a freak out because the traffic, the driving, like how expensive everything was. We were staying at this hotel on South Beach, and I just was like, this place is like a simulation. It is like not a real place. It just freaks me out, you know? So that might have been my low, just being like, I don't think I like Miami. I don't think that is like where I'm meant to be as a Floridian. It's just so different from what I'm used to, you know? I definitely think I have a new appreciation for Pinellas County and St. Pete in particular. I'm like, was telling my mom, you know, I've been all over the state as a kid and now as an adult, and I really do think we have the best of all possible worlds. You know, we've got the best beaches in Florida. I think we have the best bookstores. Obviously, there are so many of us now. And downtown still is a great thing. There's a lot of history, like here in Tarpon Springs, Dunedin. You know, you have like a lot of preservation of Florida history, but it still feels modern. So I've definitely gained a newfound appreciation for Florida. But I think my best moment of the tour was my launch at Tombolo. There was a person in the crowd who was a bartender at Shadrack's, which is like my favorite beach bar. And he was maybe 80 or so. He had been a bartender there most of his life. And so he came to my event. I mean, I never met him. I didn't know who he was. And he had just found my book and came up to me after and was telling me all these stories about working at this beach bar that I've been going to for a long time. And it was just really cool to like see kind of a full circle moment like that. It was really great.
Sometimes a guy shows up there who gets people to sign his shirt. Did he show up for you?
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Yes.
He was not there, but I have seen him since.
Okay.
Yes. We have this bookstore regular who goes to a lot of Florida book events, and he has this amazing, like, Grateful Dead jean jacket that just has, like, decades worth of authors' signatures on it. He's so cool. I think his name's George.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he looks like Curb Your Enthusiasm. I can't
Yes,
think.
Larry David.
Yes.
Larry David with, like, a ball cap and a
Yeah.
Grateful Dead shirt
Yeah.
on, you know. He's the best.
What's your favorite Florida song? Because there's so many of them.
Yeah, actually, this was going to be an essay that didn't make it into the
Oh,
book.
okay.
I did a lot of research for a class in grad school about the Seminole Wars.
Mhm.
We were doing like a service project for the Atatiki Museum down in Big Cypress, and looking at kind of like the cultural ephemera and the timeline and all the like poetry and literature that had come out around the Seminole Wars and putting those into like a timeline of written work about the wars. And I remembered this country song while we were working on it that I was like, wait, I always loved this country song, but now that I'm thinking about it, I think a white guy wrote it, but it's about the Seminole, and it's called Seminole Wind.
John Anderson.
John Anderson. And it's got this like really kind of eerie sound to it. It's like a one lone, you know, string instrument that he's kind of singing over. It almost like sounds like you're like on the prairie at night. And I kind of looked into it. I was like, wait, I gotta know why this white country singer wrote this story. It's called, you know, all about Micanopy and the Everglades and Osceola and all of these natural sites. And the more I looked into it, there's all this lore behind it. And he actually filmed a music video for that song with a bunch of members of the tribe on the reservation. They were like very eager to be part of his music video, which is kind of interesting. So if you look at a picture of the guy, you would not think that he's the type of person to be like, hello, I'm a cultural ambassador for the Seminole tribe of Florida, you know? He's just like a very 90s country star, kind of big 10-gallon hat. But it's such a beautiful song, and I think it captures like something really special about the nature of Florida.
There's a really good version of that song by Mofro, which is a band down in Jackson.
Oh,
Guy
I'll
named
check that
J.J.
out.
Gray is their lead singer.
Nice.
It's excellent.
Yeah, I love. If you've never heard it, I highly recommend you listen to it. Seminole Wind.
So you're passing over Flirting with Disaster by Molly Hatchet for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, you could say Sink Florida Sink by Against
Oh,
Me.
yeah.
That's another really good one
Yes.
that, as a teenager, we were screaming that at the top of our lungs for sure at shows.
There's the title of your next book.
Sink Florida Sink.
Yes.
Yeah.
All the Against Me
Or
fans can
Drink
pronounce
Florida
it.
Drink.
Well, that
Yeah.
would work too.
Margaritaville.
Yeah, there you go. We were talking
I
about
think
this.
Jimmy Buffett owns the copyright.
Yeah. I was telling my folks this funny story yesterday that at the bookstore we had some folks come in and I was in the back room kind of eavesdropping. They were in the kids section and they were looking at this children's book that was like, you know, my favorite Florida or something like that. So, oh, what's the state bird? What's the state flower, etc. And they were like quizzing each other, the adults.
Yeah.
Oh, do you know, what's the state bird or whatever? And they got like every single one wrong. And I was just like cracking up to myself. So then we were quizzing each other about it. Like, oh, do you know what the song or the flower is? And we were kind of joking that, you know, there's this petition going around for the state bird to be changed
Yes.
to the flamingo, I believe. Or the pelican?
It's a dual thing. The flamingo to be the state bird and the Florida scrub jay to be the Florida songbird, which is silly because
Yeah.
scrub jays make this sound like chirp chirp. And that's
Not really a song.
Yeah, not really a song.
But we were saying, like, okay, well, if we could vote, like, what would we have the
Mhm.
state bird? And so we were talking about Margaritaville, and I said, well, that would be, I think, the state song. But then we figured maybe the Conch Republic, if they secede from the state, that would be their state song.
Yeah, probably. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's. Do you guys have any other questions? Oh, yes, ma'am.
I do.
Yes.
So, I haven't read the book yet, but it's essays, but you said you're in there, but it's not memoir. So I'm curious because I've written some personal essays that are a little more travel-ish than it sounds like yours. But I'm always curious about this to anyone who does like creative nonfiction or anything that's verging towards
Yeah.
memoir. How did you choose, like, how much, like, what to put in of yourself or others? You know, that's always that delicate
Yeah.
thing of how do you make that decision that you're telling a story that maybe you need to also tell other people's stories a little in the meantime. And I'm just always curious how writers approach that.
Yeah, I think it depends on the essay itself. And then when you look at it as like a collection, you can kind of adjust, right? So I also have this conversation with my students all the time because they're like, no one's going to care about my life. I'm 18 and I've never done anything, you know? I'm like, yes, but you are the only you who's ever experienced that thing. And actually, the more specifically individual you get, I have found, the more universal people seem to see your story as, which feels like counterintuitive, but I think is true. And when I read nonfiction, I often find that I want more of the writer's personal story rather than when they veer into like research or, you know, I get bored with that sometimes. But I love research. I love doing research. I like the process of like finding these parallels and these connections. So often I'll kind of start with like 2 columns of like a planning document. Like I know I want this experience, this personal story to maybe be in the essay, but I want this kind of outside thing to be like the framework for it. And then depending on how much information I have or how much research I've done, then I can kind of like thread it in depending on like how it fits. So like for Wild Things, that started as like a super fragmented thing that was mostly about the movie. And as I started writing it, the personal stuff started coming out, and then that just kind of took over. Like it became most of that essay because I just realized it was something I hadn't written about before, had a lot to say, and I couldn't tell that story like halfway. Like I had to really tell the whole personal thing or else it wouldn't kind of pay off in the way that I wanted it to. So in that case, I like really dialed up the personal in like 2nd, 3rd, 4th drafts. Other ones, like the St. Augustine essay, which is about Ralph Waldo Emerson and St. Augustine, my personal story didn't really have much to do with it. Like, I was interested in it, but I am not like the kind of main character or connected in any way to like the real issue that I'm talking about. It's important to me, but I felt like inserting myself too much would kind of steer away from what I was really trying to say. So in that case, I was like, no, I want Ralph and this movie and the history of St. Augustine to kind of take the forefront. I will just be like the narrator that, you know, people are in my car with me as I'm in the, you know, going down A1A and in the library as I'm reading this stuff, because I wanted kind of to be like a pal for the reader in that case. But I kept it kind of to a minimum. So I think it depends on like, what are you trying to say? Is it better served by you telling that and embodying that, or is the material kind of speaking better than you could, I guess?
And in that process, and again, I'm sorry if this is going to be so obvious to me
No,
as I
no.
read the book, but in that process, were you making decisions, like did you have a sense of the balance that you wanted to achieve with that, or did it just completely evolve as you were writing, or did it just completely evolve as you were going through the editing process?
That's a good question. It's hard to like
Look back and
to
remember.
know when it happens. I think I am kind of incapable of like doing one thing or the other. I don't know if it's just that I'm like a stubborn person or my ADHD or like what, but I just can't do one like straight memoir, straight research. Like, that's just less interesting to me. So I think really the trouble for me has always been like, can I pull it off doing both? Like, how do I weave it in? How much is too much? How little is too little? Like, and for instance, in the last essay, which is kind of like a direct to the reader address about Florida and an answer to this question that a lot of people have asked, like, how can you live there, you know? In that one, I found that the more personal I got, the kind of, it veered off course. Like, it wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. And my editor was like, you're really going in for like 4 paragraphs about the governor, and I don't think you should do that. And not because you don't have some valid points, but because you're taking away from what you're trying to say by like getting too kind of like mouthy or something, you know? So I think in some ways, like the first draft, it's not conscious at all. I'm just writing to see what's there, or like, you know, there's that great, very often quoted for a reason because it's really good quote by Joan Didion where she's like, I write to find out what I think. Like, often I'll be like, I actually don't have a strong opinion on this, but I'm interested in it. I'm going to try to write a first draft. And somewhere along the way, like, the opinion will present itself, or the idea or the thing that I find most interesting shows up. And I'm like, oh, okay, now I have to go back and like get there quicker, or support that better, or say it more clearly, or something like that. So the first draft, I almost never know. It's really in like the revision process that I think that becomes more clear. Which sucks, because you want to write a perfect first draft, but it doesn't happen that
I think
way.
anybody who writes the first draft
Yeah.
perfectly.
I don't think so.
What do your students think about your book?
That's a good question. A couple students were at my launch event, which was a little surprising to me, but very cool. Only one of them said something to me about it afterwards, and she was very lovely and kind about it. She's also no bias. It's just coincidental that she happened to be my favorite, smartest student, but she must have excellent taste.
Yeah,
But
clearly.
no, she was just like,
A+
oh,
for her.
I read your book and I really liked it, and I was thinking of doing something similar, you know, in the future. Do you have, like, how did you do this, or how did you do that? So that was really the only like conversation I've had with them about it, but it came out while I was teaching, so who knows, maybe next semester it'll be a different
Oh, so
conversation.
it's not assigned reading yet.
No. I have had professors who do that, and I always was like, I'm never going to do that, but I don't know, I might sell some books.
Yeah, it's a way to guarantee sales.
Yeah.
Reading.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What reading do you require the students to do?
So when I teach first year composition, they don't have an assigned, like, you know, they don't read novels or short stories. That's more like writing concepts and foundational stuff. But we do occasionally look at some like essays or things that I think work well. But for my creative writing classes, when I teach nonfiction, I have taught Anne Hull's book, Through the Groves, which I think is like one of the best Florida memoirs I've read. She grew up, her father was in charge of an orange grove in Sebring in the, 50s, 60s? Something like that. She's a veteran journalist like yourself,
A
and
Pulitzer winner.
yeah.
Unlike me.
There's still time.
Yeah.
But I have found that, you know, I didn't know if my much younger students would like connect to that like time period, but they loved it. And they really,
She's a beautiful writer.
yeah, beautiful writing, and she was so lovely, and she actually did a virtual visit to our class, and they got to ask her questions, and so that was really cool. And then I've also had them read, a lot of personal essays, because in nonfiction, for some reason, that seems to be the thing that people write, that they gravitate towards, even though I'm always like, no, you can do stuff like this. You can do reporting and travel writing and food writing. But maybe when you're, 18 to 22, that feels like the ripest material. Is like breakups and
Nobody
friendships.
knows what I'm going through.
Yeah, no one understands my pain of, my mom grounded me or whatever. But I can relate, when I was their age, those were the biggest concerns to me as well. And they surprise me all the time with like how articulate they are about the things they're going through and how they see the world and the movies and music and stuff that they're listening to. So I try to teach like examples of personal essay that I think do that really well. Usually we read some David Foster Wallace, that supposedly fun thing I'll never do again, which is about his cruise ship experience. We read a lot of Melissa Febos, who is one of my favorite nonfiction writers. She writes a lot about her personal life. She has a great book, a craft book called Bodywork, which is about personal narrative and kind of, there's a stereotype, especially for women who write nonfiction, that it's like navel-gazy or, oh, you're publishing your diary or something like that. And she, I think, writes a really great rebuttal to that, which is like, men do it all the time, and people think they're geniuses.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, I teach her essays a lot as well. I think she's pretty brilliant.
The thing I wonder though is, which one of those students do you think is going to is going to be the next one to write a book like this?
Oh.
The one who's the super student, or maybe somebody who's a slacker and
Yeah, you
they're,
never know.
they're just hanging out and getting ideas for lyrics for their band to play.
Yeah, you honestly never know. Like, I have had semesters where I've like left the end just wrung out, almost in tears, thinking like, I just didn't connect with them. Like, I don't think they learned anything. Like, I'm looking at a sea of glazed over eyes, and this is pointless. What am I doing? I should have been a tech billionaire or something, And then like 2 years later, I'll get an email from a student that's like, I'm in my MFA program, and I just wanted to say thank you for, your guidance in this or that or whatever. And it's never the ones you think it's going to be, you know? I mean, there are some brilliant students that, like this one I mentioned who came to my office, like, I know she's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
She's just leagues above a lot of her classmates in, like, sheer work ethic. And, she's got this drive. Like, you can tell when someone, like, wants something and they're, like, working towards it, A sense of urgency, I guess. So sometimes you know it, but they always will surprise you with, I was a slacker when I was a college dropout.
You're a college professional
Yeah.
back when you first graduated,
Yeah, and I
first went to college.
I dropped out of college my first go around. I was not prepared. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I had always been writing, but I didn't go to school for that. And I just felt very aimless. And I started working in restaurants, and I moved to New York, and I did lots of other things in between. And then when I went back to school as an adult, I had a professor who actually just got a book coming out, and she's going to be at Tombolo soon. So kind of a full circle moment. Mm-hmm. She was really a mentor to me, and because I think I was much older than some of my classmates, she kind of took me aside and was like, listen, I see you more as like a future peer, and I want to help you. Like, I want you to... Nice. Yeah, she really did a lot for me, and just her, like, taking me seriously did so much for me taking myself seriously, So I always try to, like, think about that experience, too, and emulate it. Like, all of my students could potentially be my peers and colleagues, and maybe someday, so I try to remember that on bad days.
We were discussing this before you got here. How are things going with your students and AI?
Yeah, you asked me on the day I have submitted my final grades, so I'm officially off the clock and I can answer this, honestly. My contract is up until August. So, no, it's horrible. It's a nightmare. It's really difficult. I find that the technology is changing so quickly that it's hard to adapt along with it. And yet, I can still spot it a mile away because we're word professionals. Yeah. We know language. We know sentences. And if you see enough of it, you start to recognize the patterns. Like, they just stick out like neon signs. But what I try to do that I think has helped a lot, this was a new approach this semester, actually, and I think it worked pretty well, at least for my in-person classes. I taught an online class, and that kind of just a wash. You don't see the kids. You don't know them as well. It's hard to connect in the same way, but for my in-person classes, on the first day, I talked to them about it. We did a writing exercise, and that's the other thing is I make them every single day. They have to write something on paper to get attendance for the day. It's good, and it makes it so that I can see how they write. I can see their sentences and their vocabulary and their syntax when they're not. So I know what doesn't sound like them. So it's kind of an insurance policy for me. But the first writing assignment we do, I ask them, when was the last time you used AI? What did you use it for? How did it help you? And what gap was there that you wanted it to fill? Was it a knowledge gap, a confidence gap, a laziness, like time, effort? Be honest, this isn't going to be used against you. I just want to know. And then that opens up a conversation about, like, okay, so what do you think is the ethical and non-ethical use? Like, this is a technology like everything else. Of course, you have to learn to use it. And in fact, our department, they kind of tell us, like, you can't really ban it. Like, they are going to be expected to use this technology in the workplace. So we don't want to, come up against that. If we're preparing them for life outside of college, like, we have to figure this out. So I kind of come up with a contract with them. And I'll say, like, what do you think is an okay use? And they're like, to find sources or to make an outline. Okay, what's unethical? Having it write your paper for you. I'm like, okay, so we all agree. You will not use it to write your paper for you because you know that that's an unethical use of AI. And they're like, yeah, totally. And then the first time they do, I pull up, hey, this was your response. You said this was unethical. Do you think it's fair to get full credit for this, And a lot of them will, now the big thing is, like, the way it really affects me the most is I feel like I spend most of my time being like an AI cop.
Yeah.
I'm not really spending my time critiquing or looking at their writing and offering feedback. I'm just checking to see if they did it themselves or not. And that's not the goal of the course or teaching, So I try to just nip it in the bud at the beginning, and then if I catch it, have a conversation with them, like, hey, I noticed this. Well, no, I didn't. Okay, tell me what the word cacophony means. I just used it to fix my grammar. I'm like, okay, but you can't do that. So as long as you have a relationship with the student, you can kind of over and over in class emphasize, like, hey, see what we just did and this concept we just looked at? A computer can't do that. It's predicted. It's not you. It doesn't know your experience. It can't reach an audience that you know.
It's not your voice.
So you really just have to kick it old school, I think, and I'm hoping they bring back, like, just overhead projectors and blackboards and blue books and all of that, I'm trying to go that route, but...
When you need a good laugh, look at there's a clip circulating right now of a commencement speaker at the University of Central Florida, speaking to the commencement for the communications and arts majors. And I don't know why she thought this would fly, but she started talking about how wonderful AI is and it's the new industrial revolution. They booed her.
Oh, good.
And she looked
Good.
shocked, like, what? What's wrong? I guess I struck a chord. Yeah, you did.
Yeah, wow, especially to the arts. I mean,
I know.
you would hope, but I do have friends who teach creative writing who say they're encountering it in their creative writing classes, and I'm like, that's blasphemy, actually. If you're taking a class to learn how to write short, like, fiction and poetry, and you're using AI, like, you're not doing it for the love of the game, But what can I say? I was once a college student who took any shortcut available to, back in the day, we just used to have someone else pay them to write our essays, So the technology changes, but the shortcuts do not.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, great.
Thanks
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks,
This has
Trey.
been wonderful.
Well, I'm so excited for you. Whoa.